Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. I'm Leah Prime, broadcasting live, and thank you so much for joining the Invisible Night School tonight. Whether you're with us live or catching us on a replay, we're glad you're here. The Invisible Night School is a small consortium of activists and cultists working behind the scenes to support a shadowy cabal within the dark realms of ufology. You can find us at theinvisiblenightschool.com. Go ahead and like, share, and subscribe to our channel and join our Discord, which we've linked below in the show description. Without any further delay, I'd love to welcome my co-hosts and co-conspirators. I'm joined by Nick, the inimitable Campbell, Rather Be Squidding, joining us tonight as our guest, and Lewis. Great to have you guys here. How are you?
And soon say we all.
Yes.
Very well. Yeah, how are you doing this week, Leah?
Oh, I'm just a little pinch of heaven. As I was saying in the green room before the show, I've somehow managed to fly below the radar for the last few months, and then it seems like in the last 96 hours, I've been the target of a whole lot of community wrath. So I think this is kind of my this is like my bar mitzvah into the UFO community. How are you, Campbell?
I'm pretty good. I've been managing to fly under the radar on this most recent development. But yeah, it's always neat. And I almost got sort of dragged into it the last time it emerged, right? Because of the whole plasma group thing. So I'm sort of sitting and watching and waiting to see what happens. Maybe we could get into a little bit of what's been going down. Yeah, like, does anybody want to sort of toss a synopsis out there?
Oh man,
you seem to be at the center of it.
I am unwittingly in the center of the hurricane. Yeah, so over the summer, the Invisible Night School, in collaboration with an independent researcher, Bradley Johansson, published what was effectively an expose of an individual in the community named Moran Lerner. Moran Lerner, under a number of different usernames and sock puppet accounts on Twitter, had effectively engaged in a number of different manipulations and deceptions with people in this community. The entire purpose of the publication, which is hosted on theinvisiblenightschool.com, was simply to draw attention to the fact that this was someone who had deliberately and consistently misled members of the community. Full stop, that's it. In the time since, I have had exactly one conversation with Moran in a Twitter space where I told him, and I will repeat before God, YouTube, and everyone, that if he had compelling evidence to show me, I would be more than happy to discuss with him behind the scenes, off the record. I would be happy to issue a public apology and retraction of the article. I never heard from him. He kept saying, you know, information is coming. It will be soon. We hear this all the time. And he then reached out to me for the first time this past Friday, requesting a sit-down meeting. I rearranged my work schedule to accommodate him on Monday. And then over the weekend, one of his acolytes, Fanny Kochis, K-O-C-S-I-S, I think Kochis, she published an article basically weaving together a loose tapestry tying the Invisible Night School into not only what she says to be a cultist element of ufology with the Bledsoes and Chris Bledsoe's story, but also claiming that Moran Lerner and to some extent herself are involved in some kind of surreptitious, shadowy organization that's out to basically dismantle cults and abuses within this community. Now, I will say, just to editorialize here for a moment, as with many conspiracy theorists, in many respects, she's right, but for the wrong reason. There are totally terrible examples of culty groupthink and cults of personalities in this space that require, I would say, a degree of accountability and addressing. But I think if you're aiming your ire at this group, you're probably misfiring substantially. Although, I mean, we might be involved with this cabal behind the scenes. But yeah, so ever since this was published, I woke up Monday morning with like 30 direct messages and text messages with links to this blog asking what the hell was going on. And my response was and remains that Moran Lerner is again attempting a redemption arc, and in doing so is lying to and manipulating yet another vulnerable person. And I think the facts and evidence around this subject matter effectively speak for themselves. And I hope that this is the last I ever have to dedicate my one wild and precious life to this subject. And I have Nick, always the voice of reason, shaking his head, saying, no, it's probably not going to be put to bed.
I mean, we heard this story about the Reapers a while ago, didn't we? That's his kind of clandestine group that involves one of his alternate personas being an AI bot, right? Troy Lippman. I don't know. It'll come back up every couple months, I'm sure. Maybe our names won't be dragged into it this time, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I have no idea. That's probably something important to call out, is that like the story narrative in this story has evolved and changed pretty fluidly in various periods of time. So I have no idea. I honestly haven't even paid very much attention to it until it's shown up in my direct messages.
Yeah. Moran tends to do this thing where he'll it's almost like cold reading, where he'll just throw out names and accusations, hoping that some of it's right, and just kind of roll with what it is based on the reactions. I've seen him do this a couple times in the past. It's kind of what's going on now. I'm sure he was whispering in the ear of Venny, who wrote that article. I think that was Venny, right? Which ended up including you and I, Leah. But I don't know. I haven't even responded to the article. I haven't even read it. I'm not really interested. I've been trying to.
I honestly haven't read it either, except the one part where my tweets are screenshotted.
Yeah, this is a great comment you just highlighted, Leah, from Steve Long, saying still hasn't accounted for his actions, but every week is pushing a new narrative of point the finger. Okay, this is sort of what I was thinking, is that none of this addresses Bradley's claims, really. If anything, it kind of like verifies what Bradley was saying, even though before we were sort of being said wasn't true. But this new piece is sort of leaning into it. It's like, yes, this all has been happening with the alternate accounts and the manipulations and stuff. That's all true because we're working to dismantle these secret cults. And it's like, okay, we don't like that. There's no evidence that that's like really true. I mean, like whatever. And then they bring in a bunch of additional new claims about, what is it, Bledsoe followers and stuff. But
yeah, Chris Bledsoe and faith healings.
Exactly what Steve pointed out, though. It's like people have been sort of like being like, oh, well, that stuff's true. So therefore, Moran's innocent of the things he was doing. And it's like, no, let's just separate all this out. Everybody's right and wrong for all the kinds of different reasons.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, they're categorically distinct subjects, right? Like there's the subject of Moran Lerner, and then there's the subject of Chris Bledsoe.
Yes.
I'm not touching Chris Bledsoe. I don't really care. Like, other than I think this is an interesting facet of the community. I work really hard to not confer value judgment on parts of this, but it feels just like a narrative that's been sort of retroactively fit onto his behaviors. In ways that, I mean, even honestly, it's not even a very compelling or interesting story. But I don't know.
Just gotta say, it seems like in ufology, everyone gets their 15 minutes of hate, and it sucks that you all are getting that right now.
I think, I will say, for this one beautiful moment in UFO Twitter over the summer, when we published Bradley's article, everybody was united in being like, look at this asshole. And like, Yeah, like I haven't gotten any hate. I've just gotten a lot of like, Leah, what's going on? And these people are vulnerable. Like this is a vulnerable person doing Moran's kind of fighting for him.
Mhm.
And it's just, you know, not anything I have any particular interest in continuing participation.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I think there's like a small handful of people that do kind of carry that torch for him still. And I mean, it's kind of sad, which is why I'm not engaging with it really, because
Yeah,
you know, I mean, I'm not a qualified person to engage with that sort of thing anyway. So I'm just going to leave it alone and let it run its course, and then watch it come back up again in a couple months under a different story with different names. But I don't know. That kind of stuff's not for me.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
and it cheapened, I think, unfortunately, any legitimate claims that they may have been putting forward in terms of this sort of like underlying, you know, issues with everybody kind of like collaborating behind the scenes or whatever they were alluding to at the end of the piece, which got kind of buried in these variety of claims that we're talking about now that was at the front of the piece. And I just think it is sort of putting two things together that didn't really fit. And I was disappointed to see that, honestly, because I thought that the Bledsoe stuff maybe would be interesting. But honestly, I read through the thing one time and now I'm like trying to remember. It's like it was so convoluted and the narrative was like not really believable, and it just sort of threw it off for me. And I think it was poorly executed. And again, like we're trying to focus on science, right? And like none of this should fundamentally be about individuals, except for calling out when somebody's like being fraudulent or something. So it's like there's a bit of that, but also like not enough to justify the amount of kind of like turbulence occurring in the community, in my view.
Yeah. All right, we've given this subject way too much airtime already. Nick, we got to talk about our Sunday night date from last week. What were you up to last Sunday night? What was I up to? Oh my God, dude, time's a construct. What were we up to 2 Sundays ago?
Michigan MUFON had one of their, it's either monthly or bi-monthly Zoom meetings. They haven't gone back to in person yet, but the presenter of that night was Jack Bouchon, the radar operator from the Lake Michigan case. So of course I wanted to go. It was actually, there's a pretty decent turnout based on what they were saying. I think it was like 30 or 40 people watching. The presentation was really, it was interesting. It was the boilerplate kind of story, although I noticed a couple changes in it. One thing Jack said that he's never brought up in the multiple times I've talked to him, or even on the Unsolved Mysteries episode, is that one of the objects was significantly brighter as he was watching it with the radar. I thought that was really interesting. And we also got a little bit more info on that waterfall UFO. I actually have the report from Ginny Tilly. Ginny Tilly was the origin of that, although it doesn't, in the actual report, it doesn't mention it sucking up water. It mentioned more of a light that looked like it was on the top of a tower. And then it kind of goes on to describe sort of what you would see if you were at night looking at a radio tower, though they claimed it was over the lake. So got a little more information on that. But what I really wanted to do and take the opportunity to do in that meeting was, again, call out Michigan MUFON for the 10 videos and over a dozen photographs that they claim to have collected and held on to, which there was questions at the end. And I did present my case of saying, like, even if these are low quality videos, we might be able to still like get some kind of locational information, or at least time up to shorten that gap between the on-the-ground sightings and the radar sightings, which the current chair, Bill Konkoleski, conceded that that was a good idea and important, and said he would look into it and get a hold of me, which of course is what he's told me over the past couple years, and also told other investigators who've reached out to him to get these videos. However, I put a link in the chat and brought up the Michigan MUFON Journal article that mentions these things, and I believe that a lot of these MUFON members in attendance had no idea about this. Like they had just heard about the case because of Unsolved Mysteries, and being Michigan MUFON members themselves, I think they, may have heard of it. But I provided the journal article, kind of cited my sources and said, like, let's look into this. And I think people are in agreement that, yeah, we should get these out. So we'll see what happens from there. It was just another opportunity for me to like ask them to share those. Not really sure why they're still hanging on to them, especially after this, but I don't know. I don't know if progress was made, but it was worth trying. Excuse me.
Yeah. As I've joked previously with you guys, I still think the best course of action is to shoot out an email, including
Right.
the entire Michigan MUFON list, and say, "Hey, about that Sunday meeting, do you
Right.
have those videos and pictures by any chance?" Sunlight is a very good disinfectant, especially
I
around
mean,
these issues.
I intend to continue harassing him, so we'll see. Maybe
Fantastic. That's the spirit of ufology right
Mhm.
here. Harassing someone on the internet for their pictures and videos.
That's so funny. Yeah, it's like having worked in like a number of not-for-profits and like government agencies and stuff, like a lot of this time, like this could literally be a question of somebody not wanting to like find the documents, you know? It's like so
Yeah,
like
it's
the
in
pressure
somebody's
can help.
archival box.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have to become more obnoxious than the actual task of finding them. I think that's
Yeah.
easy though.
You have to go in there, find the person who's going to have to walk over and physically do it,
Mhm.
get to know
The
them.
poor librarian, or the
Yeah.
archivist.
Yeah.
I mean, it might be a case of them digitizing like VHS and Super 8 tapes, but I mean, it's perfectly easy now. So I don't think there's enough excuses anymore. I think it's time to see those, even if they're dots on a black screen, there might be some valuable information in them. So I'm going to keep pushing and see if we can get those out. The more information, the better in that case, since it's still kind of ambiguous, at least in my opinion.
Absolutely. I mean, UFO stuff, like more information is always kind of good, right?
Right.
Like,
yeah.
It's always the problem is that somebody says they have something that's great and we can't see it because whatever reason.
Right. Of course.
Yeah. Rather, what have you been like? What's your commentary been on the recent like developments in the UFO community? Do you think that any of this like turbulence has to do with like the report being so late? People are getting antsy. Like, what's your read on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of interesting things with the report, right? And I think maybe the most interesting is the kind of the change of the guards of who are writing the report. It used to be that Taylor, God, I forget his first name. Don't want to mix him up with the other Taylor, but the Travis Taylor and Jay Stratton were in charge of it when the first report was written. And that was, I thought it was a good report. I thought it was accurate, but it was, kind of played towards the, these are UFOs a little bit more than people might have expected. And my take is I'm guessing that the new people in charge, Sean Kirkpatrick, who I've heard great things about, and he has a great resume. I'm guessing that he's kind of looking at it with a more skeptical eye and kind of getting his ducks in a row a little bit more. And it seems to me like you kind of heard some rumors about this, months ago, where people were saying, I don't know if we should trust this new UFO report. Let's take it all with a grain of salt before we even heard anything. So I get the feeling that there's some inside rumors that this report is going to kind of squash some people's hopes. And I get the feeling that that's kind of the cause for some of the turmoil that we might be seeing.
I've been seeing the 50% solved number. Do you think there's any truth to that, or is that just sort of like speculation right now?
Yeah, who knows, right? I mean, it's definitely speculation. I'd say it doesn't really matter, really, what the percentage is. If it matters if one of the solved cases is something truly anomalous, then that's huge. But other than that, it's kind of expected that they might not be able to have enough information to solve everything.
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll wait in eager anticipation until that comes out.
When's the betting pool on when that's actually going to come out?
That's a good question.
The only excellent thing going on while we wait is uplifting tweets. Fettuccine Split every day is tweeting a Photoshop of Jacques Vallée taking a bong rip until the report gets released.
That's amazing.
Yes, big credit to that Twitter account for at least adding some levity to this whole situation.
There's a great meme by Simon Fly, too, of John Greenwald sitting there with face with 2052.
That was so funny. That was amazing. I laughed hard at that one.
Yeah, so rather obviously you're already here, but I'm going to do a quick rundown on you before we kick off, more of this roundtable and interview session. So folks, we're welcoming Rather Be Squidding onto the show for a roundtable discussion. We're specifically going to be hopefully digging into this notion of the complexity of first contact. What does it look like and entail to make contact with extraterrestrial life? Rather Be Squidding is the former co-host of the Unidentified Celebrity Review and currently produces videos on his own YouTube channel where he writes and produces content on a range of subjects, including UFOs, UAPs, dark matter detection, and yes, first contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. So Rather, Consider this your official welcome onto the stream. Obviously, we've been shooting this shit for 15 minutes. And you know, very candidly, finding you guys on UCR, particularly the work that you were doing on your independent videos earlier this summer for me was really formative. I'm sure you remember me pestering you and saying, man, how are you doing your production? How do you do this? Because I was starting to feel this desire to get people together and talk about the subject and a number of subjects in a more collaborative and I would say elevated fashion than what I was hearing sort of in the popular discourse on the subject. So I want to be super clear that I don't think this group here would exist if it weren't for your influence and your inspiration.
Well, yeah, I appreciate that. Well, yeah, thank you, and thanks for having me on here. You know, I'm really a fan of all of you and what you're doing. This is a great group of minds that you have collected here at the Invisible Night School. It's really cool. You all kind of approach it from different directions, and I love what you're doing. And thanks for having me here.
Yeah, so yeah, we're super excited. So why don't you start off? Tell us your most recent video. Like, walk us through what you were trying to present and what your findings were and what your thoughts are about the subject.
Yeah, well, you know, since you reached out a couple months ago, you know, I was kind of at a point where I was trying to find out where my interest in this ufology kind of lies, right? Like, you know, I was always been really interested in UFOs, aliens, all the strange stuff. And then in 2017, you know, it started being, you know, real with the New York Times posting an article. And I started really getting into it then and started kind of diving down to specific topics. You know, somewhat recently, a couple of months ago, kind of started losing my faith, I guess, in, you know, the official disclosure and what, you know, the government might have and whatnot. And I was, you know, kind of discouraged at the topic. You know, on one hand, I, you know, still find this stuff really interesting. But on the other hand, it, you know, it sucks when you're interested in a topic and then you kind of get disillusioned, you know, you get your hopes up and they kind of smash. So I was a little bit in a lull of, you know, what topics do I want to pursue? You know, I still enjoyed making these videos and whatnot. So I kind of, you know, did some introspection and trying to figure out, you know, why am I still interested in this topic? Because I still am. And I kind of ended up thinking, well, you know, I don't believe that there's any contact right now. You know, I don't think that there's any good evidence for that. But I still think that aliens hopefully exist. You know, NASA just put out an article talking about the theory of the Great Filter, which is one reason why they might not exist. It's because, you know, alien races might all kill themselves. And I find that a very pessimistic and kind of sad outcome.
There's a lot of projection in that view, isn't there?
Yeah. yeah. I mean, and it seems very, very possible. But I'm an optimist, and I like to think that they are out there somewhere. And if they are, you know, that begs the whole Fermi paradox question of, you know, why haven't we heard them? You know, we've been searching for them for 60 years now. So I really kind of tried to dive into that and see, you know, try to convince myself that they are still out there. They haven't all killed themselves. And so how can you explain that? So I, you know, researched SETI. You know, the SETI has been primarily involved with radio communication, the hunt for radio communication from other civilizations. And I think that there are specific reasons why that might not be the most fruitful search. We can get into that if we want, but there's also, you know, other technologies of SETI that are advancing, like laser SETI, which is really, really pretty cool. And that's, you know, radar or radio, you know, you're sending out a signal that's expanding everywhere. With laser, you can really send a directed signal. So there's a lot of talk recently about how that might be how the search for extraterrestrial intelligence will be solved. You know, maybe people are beaming laser information everywhere. But, you know, even that might not be the final answer, right? You know, we're at a limited stage in our technological progression. Who knows where the ultimate end for that might be? So, you know, I think that the periods of, you know, us looking for radio or us looking for lasers aren't likely to overlap with other civilizations doing the same. But then, you know, the one kind of key element that really kind of got my faith back there again was doing some research and finding out that, you know, us, humanity, we're on the brink of being able to send probes at 25% the speed of light, which is, you know, we can reach our nearest neighbors in, you know, decades as opposed to, you know, hundreds of years. So we could theoretically make a trip with our current technology, send a camera out and take a, you know, a photo of Proxima Centauri within our lifetimes. And there's plans to do that. There's some big money. There's a Russian billionaire, Yuri Milner, and Mark Zuckerberg are actually investing a lot of money to make this a reality. And so if this is, right on the cusp of what humanity is about to accomplish, it seems to me that alien civilizations who are at or above our technological level surely would have already done this and sent probes here. So then the next question is, why aren't we seeing these probes? And, I think the answer to that is we wouldn't see them. We don't have the ability to see them. It was kind of surprising to me that we've never, there's a cloud of 1 trillion objects that are kind of encircling our solar system. At least we think that's what everyone thinks. That's where comets come from, that they theorize. We've never actually seen any of these objects. Some are kilometers wide. We also think that the theory that there's another planet in the solar system is a very credible theory proposed by lots of scientists, and that's a massive body at the outskirts of our solar system, and we still haven't been able to find that. So if there is a medium to large size alien probe somewhere in our solar system, we would not have caught it. And then what makes that even more interesting is that astronomers continue to chug ahead and build cooler, newer, and better devices. And James Webb Telescope is one example of that, which is been giving us beautiful images of space. Hasn't found aliens yet, but it has advanced our understanding of physics and space. And there's other things like the Vera C. Rubin Observatory is coming online in, I think, next year in 2024. And that's just a very special, the biggest digital camera ever that's going to be taking pictures of the sky. And this tool actually will be able to detect a lot of these small objects in our solar system that previously have been invisible to us. So I think that there's a very real chance of aliens being in our solar system. And I think that, as we develop these tools like the Vera C. Rubin, it seems like the resolution that we're getting of our solar system is getting better and better. And if they're here, which I think they are, knock on wood, I think we're going to be able to find them soon. So I that's kind of my video in a nutshell, and kind of where my interest now lies. And I'm trying to follow that, and I'm hopeful that we'll get some good news in the next couple of years.
Yeah, you kicking it off with SETI brings me back, right? I can remember with my first computer, I was probably 12 or 13 years old, running the SETI screensaver, right? My first exercise in distributed computing, and being very excited at the prospect of not only having a very cool screensaver, but participating in some small sense with this search. And as an adult, very much love and enjoy any interview I've heard with Seth Shostak at SETI. He's an absolutely brilliant and extremely witty guy with a seemingly infinite wellspring of patience for all kinds of questions about the nature of SETI and the search for extraterrestrial intelligence.
And he gets a lot of crap. Like people don't like him.
He really does.
I think Stanton Friedman famously had kind of a feud with him, didn't he? Kind of the leader of the cult of SETI. What he called it.
Well, whatever. He's very charming, and he's extremely smart. I harken back to his interviews with Art Bell from like the 90s, and even I think as late as 2015, and just am consistently struck not only by his good-natured approach, but he has this incredible self-effacing sense of humor about the entire thing, which I guess is a necessary development when you're working on this subject in this space. So let's talk about von Neumann probes, because that to me feels like where a lot of this conversation can go about creating these probes that can sort of intelligently distribute themselves and modify themselves in a way to grow and explore not only the universe, but additional planets in like a self-replicating fashion.
Yeah, that's a fascinating idea. And the concept of that is essentially a robot that can build another one of itself, right? Specifically a space robot that can go to the moon, gather resources, create another one of itself, and send themselves somewhere else. And if that's possible, which it seems like it is, right? Because you can view humans as von Neumann machines, right? You could have exponential colonization of the galaxy, and you could do that in matter of millions of years, which is a blink of the eye in the astronomical sense. And so that used to be my kind of go-to for, why I think aliens are here, space probes are here, because if that's possible, exponential exploration of the galaxy, it seems like for sure they're here, right? Mm-hmm. I was digging in a little bit more about just how our galaxy works and how things rotate about. And, my current thinking is I don't even think that we need von Neumann probes to have the expectation that aliens are probably here. And the reason for that is, we've done, I think, I'm forgetting the exact number, the age of our solar system in the terms of, how many times we've gone around the center of the galaxy. I think it's may only be a couple, but it might be 18. I'm not sure about that. But the point is that as, we kind of view ourselves as, a static solar system, and that, the distance to Proxima Centauri is, 8 light years away, or however many it is. But the truth is we've been mixing up and we're continuously churning, all of us, all the solar systems, and our neighbors are vastly different, billions of years later. And just by the movement of the galaxy or the solar system throughout our galaxies, we've been close enough to enough stars that if one of them had alien technology and could send probes to our nearest neighbors, like we're currently considering sending to our nearest neighbors, we should have passed by someone who had that capability and had sent stuff to us.
Mm-hmm. There was a paper, and I want to say it was maybe 2015, 2016, where they proposed a solution to the Fermi paradox, actually. That sounds a lot like what you were saying about the movement of stellar systems in the galaxy. Kind of like how when we launch something to the moon, we wait till it's timed up because it's a shorter distance and it's a better distance. And they kind of use that as a model to say that, like, you could propagate areas of the galaxy when they're closer together. I don't know how practical. That was more of like it seemed more of like a thought experiment. But it does make me wonder, and a lot of what you were talking makes me wonder what everyone on the panel here thinks about the Fermi paradox, and if it's a paradox at all.
Yeah, I think that could be.
Go on. Sorry.
I was going to say there could be. We tend to think of technological solutions to the Fermi paradox, but there could also be an evolutionary solution, which is that complex life is very rare, even though the universe may be teeming with life. This is an argument that Nick Lane makes. He's a English biochemist. He thinks about things from an energetics point of view, and that you need mitochondria in eukaryotic cells, like what we've got for our energy factories in our cells, that you need that sort of system to evolve, and that sort of endosymbiosis to happen before you can get complex life. And it took something like 2 billion years for that to happen. And there's no guarantee that it would have happened if conditions were a little bit different. It could just be completely contingent. So there's also like the possibility that there is a ton of life out there. It's just not, it never gets to the stage of anything like the complexity we have.
Right, and intelligent life doesn't necessarily need to develop technology, right?
Exactly, as well.
Well, and Louise, because you're, an academic, a professional academic who specializes in evolution, your views on this are extremely, interesting. Why would it be that? Could you explain, like, why the increasing complexity results in failure of individual, like, particular species?
Well, most species that exist have gone extinct because of contingent events in the environment. So it could be competition with other species, it could be pathogens, or it could be mass extinction events, which have wiped out like a huge portion of the Earth's population of species, like at any given time. Even though they've only happened about maybe 5 or 6 times, they have killed up to 90% of the Earth's species, when they've happened. So, I mean, but there's also the question of what is a species, because that has to do with reproductive isolation and the ability to interbreed. So it might not apply to asexual so-called species. It depends on what species concept you use as well. But I'm not really sure what. Could you rephrase the question a little?
Yeah, the underlying thought is that, there have been multiple mass extinction events over and over in Earth's history, sometimes resulting in a radically diminished, genetic, population left. When the genetics sort of repopulate the Earth, they tend towards complexity, increasing complexity. Maybe I'm trying to get at, why is it if there are repeated failures on Earth and then complexity reemerges, why would it be that, I mean, obviously speculation, but why would it be that it doesn't move towards that complexity in other solar systems conceptually at the same rate anyway?
Oh, that's because, well, I mean, first you need, for example, if you have a mass extinction event, that clears away a lot of the ecological niches. So other groups can then evolve to fill those niches without competition. So, for example, after the dinosaurs died, you got the adaptive radiation of mammals, and they really, started to become more predominant, resulting obviously in us eventually. But the question about complexity arising in the first place, that has to do, in Nick Lane's view, and I think I probably agree with him, that there's an energetic constraint, because prokaryotes are actually very, very complex biochemically. They've got much more biochemical diversity than we do. And yet it isn't like a smooth incline from simple to complex. It's that you need some sort of special event, like the acquisition of mitochondria, which were initially bacteria. You had the archaea, a group of archaeons, which acquired bacteria, and they formed an endosymbiosis, and that eventually culminated in eukaryotic life. Okay, but it's that made available a bunch of energy for those cells which they couldn't have had otherwise. So it's an energetic constraint. It's almost binary. It's like yes or no, and if you can't cross that threshold, then you don't get complex life. So like you already need complex life to then, as you were saying, like you have the emergence of other complex life after mass extinction events, but you already need something which is already pretty complex, like animals, to exist.
So I'm heading up a group that's reading this book by Andrew Gallimore, Alien Information Theory, Psychedelic Drug Technologies in the Cosmic Game. And I promise not everything always comes back to psychedelics with me, but I bring this up because last night we read the chapters with John Conway's Game of Life. And there's this great part where Gallimore talks about as with other complex systems, life can only exist in that narrow band at the edge of chaos where order and disorder are critically balanced. But life seems like a very special type of complex system, and indeed life has particular properties that allow us to define it as such. Because, Lewis, what he draws upon is a lot like what you're talking about, like these energetic systems that interplay with like the emergent progression of like complex life or complex systems. And I love seeing the talk of this, I don't want to say become more mainstream, but sort of become a more nuanced and sophisticated approach to just straight up like talk about evolution, right? Like like delving more into these energetic systems.
Yeah, and rather you were talking about that in a recent video as well, about what is that science may have discovered what life is in terms of thermodynamics.
Yeah. There's an interesting theory that that life is, to increase entropy is essentially what it does, which seems kind of counterintuitive, right? Because it seems like you're doing against entropy by making stuff organized, but by the process of self-organizing, you're actually, putting out energy and making entropy net increasing, which I thought was an interesting theory. And I think, Lewis, what you're saying is very interesting to me. And it's one of the questions that I really grapple with, which is, how do you extrapolate from a sample size of one, right? I kind of do the naive approach and figure, hey, we exist, we're intelligent, which means probably we all are, right? But I know that there's, more mathematical analysis, more rigorous analysis you can do on that. And I guess, my question is, what made us cross that threshold to complexity, and why might that be rare?
You mean human beings specifically?
Or the eukaryotes, I guess,
that was so there could well have been many acquisitions of endosymbionts, but they failed, or they just didn't lead to something like mitochondria. So mitochondria are probably a singular event. And that's why we should not expect that other extraterrestrial life, if we find it, would be complex. Because if you can't have something like mitochondria, then you're limited in size and complexity, internal morphology, I mean. So, eukaryotes have got a bunch of organelles, like endoplasmic reticulum and all these other complex little robotic compartments. And it was ultimately the acquisition of mitochondria, these energy factories, which allowed for those to evolve. If you look at a prokaryotic cell, it's much more simple internally in terms of its morphology. And they tend to be much, much smaller. So hundreds or even tens of thousands of times smaller than a eukaryotic cell. But it's really that revolutionary innovation of the acquisition of bacteria, which eventually became mitochondria, was the thing that allowed for eukaryotes to take off. And if you don't have that event, which could be very rare, as suggested by the fact that it took 2 billion years to happen, because before that there wasn't an increase in complexity. It was just basically prokaryotes, which had a lot of biochemical variation, but they didn't have much in terms of they weren't building multicellular organisms, for example. So if you don't have that evolutionary innovation, then you don't have our type of complexity. It's just not possible.
Interesting. So let's say that the James Webb Telescope, goes and looks at our nearest neighbor and finds evidence of prokaryotic life, that has been evolving for 5 billion years or something like that, some longer period than we've had evolved. I guess in your opinion, would that then decrease the odds of intelligent life being out there? I've always come from the viewpoint of, if we find even any life, that's going to increase the odds of intelligent life. But hearing you talk, I'm rethinking that a little bit.
Yeah. I tend to think it could go either way. Like, you could interpret that as meaning that the aliens are here and they're hiding, or that life is common, but it's just, since we don't find any definitive technological signatures, then complex life is very rare, even if life per se is very common.
Do you think that we've been looking long enough to determine or to even detect signals like that? And you know what I'm saying? Like our capabilities to detect radio signals. What does that go back to? Like the 50s? I think?
Yeah. 1939, according to Rather's video. Yeah, so, that was when they first started doing this.
On the grand scheme of things, we've been looking for a very short period of time. Is that enough time to actually make any kind of determination?
I don't think so, but what do you think, Rather?
Well, yeah, I mean, we'd only have, with our current technology, we'd only be able to find a radio signal if they are broadcasting directly at us, intending for us to see us. Avi Loeb's done some interesting papers, decades ago about the chance of finding radio leakage. He determined that, if we really are, careful about it, we probably could find radio leakage from around a couple hundred light years within us. But I think that kind of require all the things to work out perfectly and us to know exactly what we're looking for. Kind of the interesting thing also with that is that the biggest source of this radio leakage isn't TV signals going out. They're not going to be hearing "I Love Lucy." It's the military radars, which is really the kind of the giveaway. That's what we would be hearing if we did pick up on any of this background leakages.
Did you all watch Cosmos, the original Cosmos with Carl Sagan?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I have. It's been a long time, but I remember this notion that he came up with, that like the way extra ET may communicate or process could be like drastically slower or faster than us. So these radio waves, I mean, they could be emitting these radio waves, but it would sound like area would be interpreted as background radiation to us, just because we're on kind of a different time frame. So I think that was from Cosmos.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So it'd be like they'd be using like very low frequency or something, and it's like super stretched out, but because slower it like comes
Yeah,
in.
yeah.
That's cool. I really like this convo, and you brought up some really neat points. Like when I've thought about the Fermi paradox, like there's the it's the Drake equation, right, where you put in the variables and you do the calculation, and it's like, oh, what's the probability? So like to me, I've always thought about it, it's like the galaxy is what matters. Like intergalaxy travel seems just like way off the charts. Like I won't even consider that. But within the Milky Way, we have like, a few 100 million stars, billions of years, multiple galactic mergers. The distance between the stars, like you said, we could be traveling subluminally at like 5% the speed of light. We could get to Proxima Centauri in like 90 years. With like advances in human health technology right now, conceivably within 50 years, somebody could leave Earth on a large colony ship and arrive still alive at Proxima Centauri in their lifetime at 5% light speed. So the math when you're doing like colonizing the galaxy at subluminal speed, it's like it takes like 5 million years subluminally for humans. We could colonize the entire Milky Way, and it's like we've been around for billions of years. So the fact that not a single alien species has seemingly colonized our system yet makes absolutely zero sense to me, and I have no way of understanding that. And I think this rarity component of the advanced life is maybe the only really viable thing I can think of for that. And even then, there are so many similar circumstances to what we have here that it really defies understanding to me on that front as well. We have a very special place here with the moon. It's much larger than most other moons, right? Because it resulted, what they believe, from a collision between two planets. And it left a bunch of the water on Earth, and then the moon became the fragment of the original planet, and it is very large, and it goes around us, and it creates a dynamo effect, and then that is what actually allows us to retain an atmosphere here. Venus, Mars, they don't have atmospheres; they get taken away. So we have some very special things happening here, and maybe there's something there about what is causing us to be so rare. But honestly, I love this subject because it makes absolutely no sense to me that we haven't already been colonized.
Maybe colonization is not the norm. You know what I mean? That's one of the popular solutions.
Maybe it's inherently risky as well, because we think about all the shipwrecks and stuff on Earth. Like people have tried to colonize. I don't know much about like the history of colonization on Earth, but I know that there have been many attempts, and sometimes everything goes to hell.
Yeah,
you're Australian. You should know all about colonization on Earth.
Well, yeah, I know. They came from criminals and stuff. So, but
and also, colonization is usually about expanding your empire and expanding your resources, right? And presumably, if technology can ever get to the point where you have infinite energy, you have infinite resources, what is the point of colonizing then? If you have more people, just build another space colony.
It's an interesting question. It's like when I think about it, it's sort of like humans, life and stuff. I mean, this isn't a novel concept, but it's like life is kind of like a cancer, right? It like consumes, replicates. There's no stopping. It only increases. Like that's what humans have done on Earth. We just expanded. There's no stopping us. And this is what I'm thinking. It's like, if we were to see a spaceship here coming from an alien planet, it's like they're here. I would say, based on a similar premise, that like for a species to become increasingly complex, develop society and stuff, there is a progress of expansionism that's intrinsic to the type of life form. And that's sort of my perception. Like with humans, we're going to just expand through this whole solar system. We're going to probably break down every body in the system, get all of the resources, like move on to the next one, almost no question to me. So it feels a lot like we're kind of like almost like a cancer, but why isn't there another cancer that preceded us?
There could be. I also think that ET could be more alien than we expect. It kind of seems like we're always looking for ourselves when we're describing the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, or something akin to it. It could just be kind of beyond what we are considering as intelligent life. We kind of tend to project. We talk about that in when we're talking about the UFO myth too. So I mean, these are all kind of the archetypical solutions to the Fermi paradox. There's and we kind of touched on it too. There's the dark forest hypothesis too. They're just paranoid about meeting each other. There's cataclysmic destruction, like life's tendency to destroy itself is kind of natural. Things like that too. So that's kind of why I brought up and wanted to hear you guys' opinions on the Fermi paradox, or even if it's a paradox at all. I'm not sure that it necessarily qualifies, but
what I keep coming back to on this subject is not just the consideration of spatial dimensions around how far or just huge spaces, but also the temporal dimensions, right? We're talking about a huge amount of time. Human history in any meaningful sense is but a fraction of this duration. And to me, it feels almost, I don't want to say inevitable, but like, of course there's other life out there. It's just a question of, are we happening to intersect in a way that anybody can make sense of? And like, the other thing I think of too, and maybe this is too pop culture-y, but like I think of like 2001: A Space Odyssey and the idea of these monoliths as being effectively tripwires to indicate to other intelligences that we're sort of approaching particular stages of development or technological advancement that is at least an indicator of our readiness to participate universally rather than just being left to our own planet. And Campbell, to what you said, like, I think you're touching on something really interesting here. It's very like PK Dick to me in the sense that the motivations that drive us to consider interstellar travel and planet colonization, these are not altruistic motives. And they're not being promulgated by altruistic people. They're being driven by the ultra wealthy recognizing that our planet is quickly becoming uninhabitable for everybody. And in turn, these visions propagated by Elon Musk, they're not about the unwashed masses getting to Mars. They're about the ultra wealthy getting to Mars. The rest of us get to hang out here and either cook or drown. And I think that I'm not prone to sort of sinister interpretations of human character, but I think going back to what Nick said, I do think there is this very human inclination to anthropomorphize like any motivation to do this sort of exploration or colonization. And when we do that, it necessarily confers a almost malicious or violent intent on this behavior.
Yeah, it's not just human, it's capitalist, right?
Yes. Yes. Let's go down that road, Nick.
Well, I struggle with the idea of anthropomorphizing aliens because, on the one hand, I think that y'all are right in that, we can't really assume that they would be anything like us. But on the other hand, I kind of feel like with the galaxy being so large, doesn't it seem like there would, in addition to aliens being completely unfathomable, there should be some like us as well, right?
Yeah.
There could be also a deeper evolutionary, getting back to evolution, there could be another reason why maybe aliens would be like us in many ways, because they'd have to be technological, to have science and intelligence, our level of intelligence. They'd need to have like abstract thought and something like language. And the other thing might be, and this is a point that Brian Sentis of the Skunkworks blog has mentioned, that
I love him. He comes into all of our videos and rips apart everything I say. It's incredible. Anyway, go ahead, Lewis. Sorry.
he was talking about the history of technology on Earth, that there's a certain social fabric that it comes out of, and it's serving a certain agenda, a certain social relations and social agendas of investment and, as we talked about, maybe expansion as well. And that aliens, in fact, might be more like us, and that other denizens of the Earth are actually the aliens. Because, there's some story by the guy who wrote the 3-body problem about he wrote about a parrot, which is like looking at the Arecibo telescope in Puerto Rico, and it was.
Oh yeah, it's by Ted Chiang.
Yeah. He was asking, the parrot was asking itself, why is it that the humans are trying to contact these aliens when we're already here? You know, as in the parrot. Mm-hmm. These other animals with these different perspectives. Mm-hmm. Whereas, like, having technology might already necessitate that your outlook is almost like human. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I get what you're saying.
Yeah, I've thought about stuff like that too, because we were talking about the divergence of evolutionary pathways and stuff, and there are things that indicate that extreme complexity does originate from entirely independent origins, right? Like the eye is a very classic example. What is like 15 different instances of it independently evolving to produce the same outcome, and in terms of like radically different like psychology, I would think of like something like octopi or squid, cuttlefish, the cetacea, or those are cetacea. But yeah, anyway, those things. Yes, thank you. I was saying dolphins. But anyway, cephalopods. They like their intelligence. The last time we were evolutionarily the same thing as them was like flatworms that like suck mud a billion years ago. Mm-hmm. So the fact that they're so radically like intelligent with like all this complex reasoning, they can like use tools, they can like self-identify and all this stuff, and it originates from such a minimal point. But of course, the point we were talking about is far before that as well with the mitochondria. But like how divergent would that psychology be if it was a octopus driving the spaceship?
Yeah, I find that idea really interesting. I was really digging into this. I was planning on doing a video kind of on that, with the premise being, what if there's a underwater civilization that we don't know about that's evolved into technology using, octopuses or squid or something like that. And I kind of, got the dampers put on that by a couple of things, which is one, it's like really hard to write underwater. So, the knowledge transfer throughout generations is hard. They have short lifetimes in addition, they only live for a couple of years. And then another interesting one is that fire is really hard to make underwater. And that's kind of the one of the impetuses for, human technology. So, that idea fascinates me of, other civilizations existing underwater and getting technology. But unfortunately, I don't think it's going to happen.
Well, I like to imagine little squid things in the oceans of, Enceladus or whatever, just sitting over the tiny little vents at the bottom of the ocean and heating up their marshmallows and iron smelting and things like that. So if there's a will, there's a way, right? Like,
Here.
Have you read The Killing Star, by the way, rather? This book called The Killing Star? Yeah, it's basically the dark forest hypothesis before it became popular. But it does have these squid-like aliens which evolved on an ice planet. So similar to Europa or Enceladus, which are moons, but anyway. I just can't imagine them actually having metallurgy and space travel. That's the only constraint.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine. That's fair.
Well, I mean, maybe all the psychic people are right in this. It's unleashing the power of the mind that will bring us through space, right?
Yeah.
Actually, well, that's a really neat part of 2001: A Space Odyssey, right? Like you mentioned, the ending is I can't remember the astronaut's name, but he enters the monolith, Dave. Right? Dave. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Of course.
Yeah.
I can't do that, Dave. Yeah. God. Anyway, people are probably cringing when I said I couldn't remember his name, but anyway, he goes in and then he becomes the Star Child, which is effectively a pure energy conscious being, which is very closely related to what people currently are sort of saying they think UFOs are. So that's kind of neat.
Sure.
Man, the ending of 2001 finally makes sense to me, Campbell.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what we're kind of circling around too, this conversation feels like it's circling around making a distinction between aliens and just non-human intelligence, right? Because when I think about this subject, I think there is this immediate inclination to think of extraterrestrial aliens, but then there's also the secondary or second order consideration of what do minds or consciousness look like that are not human, that are not necessarily literal extraterrestrial intelligence, but are alien in the sense that they're not human. And people believe themselves to have interactions and contact with them. And in fact, people have believed themselves to have interaction and contact with them through all of recorded history, across all cultures, across all religions. These reports come up. And I think when we talk about these experiences that individuals report, whether it's contactees or people experiencing divine revelation, however we want to label it, we're similarly tasked with what it looks like and means to identify these other minds that people claim to encounter or believe themselves to encounter. And similarly trying to understand their provenance. Where are they coming from? What are they saying? And these experiences, like, right, they happen organically. They can be deliberately induced through things like meditation, breathwork, psychedelics, fasting, sensory deprivation. And what we also have very poor frameworks for understanding and contextualizing these events, because when I think about first contact as a science fiction or a Star Trek idea, we think about all of the ethical and social and cultural implications of what it means to encounter the other or the alien. But when we talk about these engagements with non-human intelligence or other minds that people report, these happen almost in a distributed fashion. There's no like figurehead. It's not like the Pope is saying, oh, this is how you talk to another mind, or this is how you engage with this other consciousness. People are left to sort of develop these engagements and experiences and interpretations independently and on their own. And I know this is a bit far afield from what we're talking about in terms of like SETI and radio signals and evolution of complex life. But I do think that the parallel conversation here is thinking about encounters with non-human consciousness that is not literal extraterrestrial aliens, but are not literal extraterrestrial aliens, but are still minds that are very foreign and different from the human mind.
I mean, look at how we interact with other cultures of humans and stuff like that, and their difficulties of understanding and language barriers, cultural barriers and stuff like that. That's pretty interesting. I mean, I suppose where they're coming from or whatever is kind of irrelevant to the discussion, though, right? Like, it doesn't necessarily matter if they're extraterrestrial or Descartes' demons or anything like that. Is what you're saying? Sorry.
Yeah. Well, it's yeah. I mean, to me personally, it's inconsequential where these experiences come from. I think they're very interesting, but I think it's part of the conversation when we think about first contact that whether or not they're generated in-house, like in people's brains, and they're just kind of this like leftover like bicameral mind experience. Or if they're encounters that are originating outside our skulls that we're engaging with, I still think it's part of this conversation of what first contact, quote unquote, looks like, because for experiencers or people who experience divine revelation or muse experiences, it's still a first time encounter with an intelligence or consciousness that is distinctly non-human. I guess we could talk about pets and dolphins and stuff, but I think that I'm really directly talking about things that seem to be of a higher intellectual order than that.
Yeah, this is a really neat what you're touching on, because it brings to mind all of human history as you're referencing in relation to religion, and how, let's think about first contact in quotes with the Bible. The Bible,
the burning bush, man.
Yeah, that's it's that first contact. What's first contact? And then you have the prophets, who are people who are having the direct relationship. And what you're saying is spot on. And so there's a weird thing that you made me think of, where our interpretations of these experiences in the modern world diverge radically. There is no common understanding of them. However, maybe our appreciation of them is a little bit more like true to reality in some ways, based on the objective analysis through the scientific method and stuff. But if we go back in time, various cultures, exactly what you're saying. As a Christian in the Middle Ages, if you had one of these experiences, you would not only know exactly how to contextualize it, you'd have a full community supporting your interpretation. You could even become a very prominent member of society, right? There are prominent tribes and things like that, where people with what we would call mental illness are actually elevated to a higher social standing because there's an association with things like creativity, insight like that. Ancient cultures always connected chaos with creative intelligence, right? Like you think about Dionysus and stuff like that. So there is this strange thing in the modern world where we don't have a shared appreciation for what's actually occurring, and it's more individual than ever, and there may be some very serious social implications to that, but maybe we're moving towards a more real experience, even though our interpretation is not as strongly supported by our cultural circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
That was a lot. Maybe it was too much. Go on.
It's never too much. This is cool.
It sounds a lot like we talk about a lot where we these numinous experiences throughout history were viewed through like the cultural or religious lens, and now in a more secular society we have kind of the UFO narrative to sometimes throw that into certain cultures, and
we have the X-Files and Twin Peaks.
Right.
Like when I was getting used to taking a bunch of like shrooms in university, I did like, dozens of times. My cultural reference point was Arrowhead, the trip report website. And through reading with my friends dozens and dozens of the reports, I gradually built up a expectation of how to interpret things as they occurred. And when, extremely stressful things were occurring in the midst of a psychedelic experience, there would be that sort of underlying memory that was built in to contextualize things and not have a severe reaction in the moment. And so it makes me think about people who are having these experiences in the modern day and have not been sort of subjected to those sort of primers in advance of an extreme religious experience or UFO or any kind of transcendental experience.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's maybe a little. I think the Arrowhead reference, I mean, we're laughing about it, but I think it's useful because it's shared information that also provides a collective language for interpretation and description of experience that otherwise would likely be outside the scope of most people's, not necessarily vocabulary, but it gives them sort of these pre-formulated frameworks that they can use in reference to discuss and describe what they're experiencing. Anyway, sorry, brother, go ahead.
I was going to say, the idea of consciousness and all this, stuff, it fascinates me. And I think that's, one almost as much as, the idea of aliens and extraterrestrial intelligence, but I'm not sure that they actually are related, right? Like the consciousness and the, hearing voices and being able to communicate with entities, that might all be prosaic, right? Like it's definitely possible, within, human chemistry that, you have these mystical and profound experiences. And it might just be brain chemistry. I listened to an interesting podcast that was talking about psychics and how some people literally do hear voices, but they don't suffer the negative effects of all that. But they kind of have that intuition voice talking to them in their head, and they don't recognize it as their own voice. And so it seems like someone from the outside is talking to you, and they were positing that might be what's going on with psychics. They might literally think that there's a voice telling them information when it's really just their intuition or subconsciousness. And you hate to, say this because, people, really hate people, positing that, what they're thinking and what they're experiencing might not be literally real. But I think that's we have to explore and consider that as well.
Absolutely. Sorry, go on.
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, this is something that gets discussed. Ian McGilchrist talks about this, the origins of consciousness and the breakdown of the bicameral mind, like these ideas that the inner monologue in the sense of self are maybe possibly a recent evolutionary thing. And so there tends to be almost like a split, where humans historically would have this inner monologue and then would have this, what felt like a third party monologue in their head, but they were both still being generated like within the confines of their skull. It was just like from a consciousness perspective, like split into two different parts.
Have you ever met anyone with what is it called, like aphantasia, or where they don't have that inner monologue? Like that's a real condition.
Oh,
That's always
yeah,
always
aphantasia.
fascinated me.
It comes up a lot, actually, in conversations with people about psychedelics, because people will not be able to mentally imagine, say, if you say to them, think of a red apple, they can't mentally create that image in their head. But sometimes with the introduction of psychedelics, like a DMT or psilocybin experience, they can. Similarly, like there's not lots, but there's studies and reports on people that are congenitally blind and have never seen anything, who then have a psychedelic experience and report like colors and movements and shapes and stuff, which is really incredible.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah.
This sort of brings a little bit to mind the Jacques Vallée and I think Eric Davis paper about, what was it called?
Incommensurability.
The commensurability.
Yeah. Incommensurability.
Orthodoxy, high strangeness, or something.
Yeah. He talks about, or they talk about the different modalities that extraterrestrials might use, possibly in a first contact event, if I recall correctly. But in any case, like how they would communicate, it might be completely different to how we would tend to do that. So yeah, that also brings up the question of like, if they have already made contact, we just don't know it.
Right. Was he kind of proposing that these people's encounters throughout history, like folklore and modern UFO, the high strangeness things, are a form of like semiotic communication, or like symbolic, basically? I mean, that sounds Jungian, of course, but
yeah, but he makes
That's
a big hay about the semiotics of contact, and that there could be some sort of meta language going on,
right?
Meaning above the nominal meaning, but you have to sort of read between the lines, as it were, to get to the real meaning.
That's it sort of reminds me of that end part of Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where they are sending light and tones, and then there's those three nerdy guys standing around a keyboard on the fly replying back, attempting to communicate and learn in real time with a non-human intelligence.
Well, now is what Vallée's saying different than the Jungian view of UFOs?
It's influenced by it. It's not exactly the same.
Oh yeah, well I suppose it's not coming from the subconscious in Vallée's version.
Yeah.
It's from a more Descartes demon-esque.
With the demon being interdimensional beings.
Whatever that means. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay, yeah. So it's almost the reverse then.
But he also talks about how maybe the UFO behavior, like how they often reported to kind of jump around and do these erratic movements and stuff like that. Well, the contact events are kind of nonsensical in a way. Like the medical procedures are completely ridiculous,
right? And
that sort of stuff. Well, they do something really weird, like they just land and then they say, "Hello, I'm from Venus," and then they just piss off, right? That doesn't make any sense if they're actually extraterrestrials, but there could be some sort of, what he's saying is that there's some sort of meta meaning behind that, and that they're trying to influence human behavior by kind of planting these little ideas in people to make them, I guess, change their lives in a way which gives them a more kind of cosmic perspective.
Yeah.
And that's slowly influencing the culture.
Didn't Terrence basically say the same thing? The message always seemed to be that, like, you know nothing, basically.
And I love the idea of interdimensional beings. Like, it's both my favorite and my least favorite, hypothesis. It's completely unprovable, but it would explain everything, right? And kind of in that, that same concept, if they are interdimensional beings, kind of the way I understand, if it were a fifth dimension, is you would essentially see this dimension and be able to, look at the entire timeline, potentially kind of look at us like a choose your own adventure book. And if that is the case, if there are, entities that have complete knowledge of entire possibilities of our world, they could do that. They could, subtly influence us, and they'd know exactly how that would ripple out into your other interactions with people. And they'd be able to, engineer whatever result they wanted to by potentially bizarre, nonsensical inputs.
Well, and how similar is sort of Vallée's reasoning to a very classic form of religious reasoning about questioning the will of God, where you fill in the blank with because you can't possibly know the mind of an infinitely perfect being. So there, so the morality within it is to question the will of God, is to be unvirtuous. To be virtuous is to be based on pure faith, which is to accept the will because it doesn't make sense. But that's filling in the blanks from reverse. It's like, since God exists, how does this make sense? Since what we're seeing are intelligent beings from another dimension, how does that make sense? Very similar.
Sure. It is a little backwards, but it's a fun idea.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. Like people are clearly making these observations. There's no question of that. The question is, what are they observing?
Mm-hmm.
So rather, I have one final question for you before you depart. Supposing we have made first contact of some kind, do you think that it would ever be disclosed to humans? Like, do you think the government or institutional powers that be would feel compelled to inform the normies?
Yeah, I guess. Well, I don't think it's really first contact unless they've exposed themselves to everyone. It's kind of my way of kind of getting out of that answer a little bit.
Sure.
And secondly, I think they would tell us. To be honest, I don't know why it would be so secret. I think it would be too big of a secret to actually keep secret, right? Like if someone actually knew, especially someone scientific minded, knew that these aliens existed, God, how could you keep that secret, right? That just seems like too big of a secret to keep. But ultimately, I don't think that if we do have first contact, I don't think it will be something that can be kept secret. I think it will be something like scientists finding a alien probe in our galaxy or something that's, undeniable by the scientific community. And I think that I don't think that has happened yet. And I think that probably will be how first contact would happen.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Well, great. I know you're on a time schedule. I want to give you a quick and easy out so we can continue the conversation. But rather, where can we find you? Where can people check out your work?
Yeah, I got a YouTube channel, Rather Be Squidding. I also co-host the Weird Recap at UFO James channel on YouTube as well. It was great talking with you. Thanks for having me on. You all are amazing people.
Of course. Thank you so much, Rather.
Come back soon.
Take care.
Yeah, come back soon.
Yeah, would love to.
Awesome.
Have a good night.
All right. That was a great conversation.
Yeah, it was fun.
Far and wide. What do you guys think? You think if there were contact made, would it be common knowledge? Would people find out?
It depends on if keeping a secret makes more profits or telling people.
Hell yeah! This is, man, I like Socialist Nick. This is cool.
Seth Shostak has commented on that, hasn't he? He's talked about like the protocols to do with SETI and that it's not possible for the government to actually cover it up because there's too much, for one thing, international involvement.
Mm-hmm.
And there are certain protocols in place which would ensure that the message would get out pretty quickly.
And I think NASA's standard, like at least what they publicly make known, is that it would be public, that they wouldn't be hiding it. I mean, that's what they're saying. Who knows? Like if it was a real national security crisis, they'd do whatever, but at least that's promising.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I find in the heydays of the 90s, what would frequently come up in my experience was discussion of the Brookings Report about how the Brookings Institute would generally not recommend disclosure about this because of the effect it would have on human culture and society and religion, etc. I find this a very, very long bow to draw. I think humans have contended with all kinds of ontological shock, both at small and large scales. And very candidly, I will say that I think the discussion on this subject has become so obfuscated with myth and folklore and misinformation and deliberate disinformation that even were it to be announced, I think large swaths of the population would either ignore it or not believe it anyway.
Yeah, look at the pandemic. Look at the COVID.
Yeah, right. Look at the pandemic. Perfect example.
And another way of looking at it is to actually review the declassified reports that the government internally produced that they made to brief themselves on UFOs.
Mhm.
And what you see is, I mean, I was just saying NASA, but the intelligence agencies, since at least the 50s, have been deciding to keep their views intentionally secret for national security reasons, which they state explicitly are related to international conflicts with typically the UK and the United States mentioned the Soviet Union.
Sure.
So we have these documents from the CIA in 1952 saying, we don't know exactly what these are. We're trying to figure out exactly what they are, but we got to keep them secret because we don't know what the Russians are knowing. And then the British say the same thing a few decades later, that they are going to keep it secret because they don't quite understand what's happening. So they are actually keeping it secret in some ways.
Have any of you guys been following Eric Weinstein's Twitter?
Not recently. Saying some good stuff.
So I actually have him muted because my professional life puts me in enough contact with like know-it-all tech guys. But he did have a very interesting thread. I'm now scrolling through his Twitter trying to find it. But he claims to have been brought into this kind of disclosure / UAP, etc. conversation. He had a bro session with Elizondo recently. One sec, I'm going to go ahead and actually just share this real quick.
Yeah.
And he, from his sort of inception into this subject through most recently, his tenor has sort of changed about the subject. First, he was extremely excited to be brought into these conversations, and then you sort of watched him in real time become a bit more cynical and reactionary around it. And one second, let me get this shared here. So this is a tweet he put out just last week, and this is explicitly about disclosure. And he says that there's basically 4 particular outcomes here to the disclosure process. The first is that the government is left to disclose it's something. The second is to disclose that it's a psyop, that there's been deliberate sort of broad psychosocial manipulation at the behest of the government. The third option, of course, is to stall and obfuscate. So kind of see what we've seen, like, it continuing this sort of shadowy subject that is sort of in this like low information zone, post-truth kind of thing. And then finally, lie and deceive. Just continuing to deliberately push back and lie about things. And I mean, this is a very interesting framework. I think what I find troublesome about it is that all of this always is like totally unfalsifiable, right? Like there's nothing you can say to counter or even critically analyze what he's saying here, because it's based on, the whole community game of telephone around ufology and whatever conversations he had with Leah Elizondo and anyone else. But I do keep coming back to this idea that if it, like the theories I've heard in this community largely echo what Weinstein is talking about in this tweet. But I still think it's over-indexing on the expectation of chaos, and also it, to me, feels like it puts too much weight on this idea that if the government acknowledges that there are extraterrestrials around, it also in turn indicates that the government and our military are not at the top of the food chain, and that's why they won't disclose anything. Like, it basically tips our hand about not being the most powerful forces on the planet. It's an interesting thought exercise, right? To think through what would actually be the implications or effects of doing this. Or unleashing this information publicly. But I still think it's nothing more than a thought exercise at this point in time.
Sure. I'm a little curious as to why he thinks C and D won't work.
So my understanding is that it won't work because at some point the others, whatever they are, excuse me, may take it upon themselves to uncloak and make themselves known without the intermediary of government or institutions of record.
Is that C and D operating implying A? Because if B is the answer and C and D are chosen, I think they would.
Well, also, like, okay, me looking at this list: A, disclose it's something; B, disclose it's psyops; C, stall and obfuscate; D, lie and deceive. Based on my reading of the declassified internal documents in the National Archives, it is all of the above. Like, it's not one of them. It is literally all of those, and I can point to exact places in their documents where that makes it clear. So, I mean,
yeah,
I don't know if he's just misinformed. He seems to be misinformed largely throughout most of the conversation he's had on this subject. So I don't know. Like, I think he's well intentioned, but you know, he got into it being like, you know, he made the big news thing being like, I'm so sorry, everybody. I was wrong. I admit it. You know, and then he started his convo that way. And now he's getting pissed off because the disclosure never happened. And now he looks like, you know, a UFO guy to all the people, and he's supposed to be this.
And there is nothing worse than being thought a UFO guy. Let me tell you.
And he's like the executive director of Thiel Capital, isn't he? Like, he's the managing director. Like, what
Peter
the
Thiel
hell?
loves this shit though.
Yeah, well,
like, this is like every billionaire's wet dream, right? Like, they're all funneling money into this kind of shit.
Well, it is like not. I like a lot of these billionaires. They're self-selected, like sociopathic nihilists, right? Like when you read the psychology reports about like top executives at corporations, it's like 90% plus are rated as like psychopath personalities.
Yeah, CEOs and surgeons.
Surgeons.
Seriously, yeah, surgeons.
Interesting. Yeah, so like, you know, it's self-selective, so it's no surprise to me that like Thiel would be like kind of stirring the pot with that, especially because, as Jason Colavito has very extensively documented, that for decades this has been UFO topic has been used by the Soviets, now Russia, to intentionally foment strife within the domestic United States. And as I've said a few times in a row each week, I think that's why the FBI has UFO people on the same slides as like white supremacists and terrorists, because they see it as a legitimate threat to national security. So there's something deeper going on here.
I agree.
Yeah. Nice comments.
Yeah, these are good comments.
There's also a arguably eugenics aspect to this, because you know, with Thiel and these other tech bro types who want to get off world, they've got like this technological fantasy utopia, or I guess it's really a dystopia, but to them it's a utopia. But they've got ideas about immortality as well. I think Peter Thiel, he's a major investor in this company which is trying to extend life.
Yeah, they've already successfully extended the lives of mice by like 30% or something by they protect the protein.
Why would you want that, dude? I want
to live forever.
You do?
Oh yeah, I would take that pill for sure.
Oh yeah, I'm with you.
Oh my god, I can't wait for the sweet release of death. Like,
I gotta see what happens next. You keep
if you're taking if you're taking the pill, you can kind of choose to, I guess, stop whenever you want. But I think that there is this sort of like nihilistic, like super evil thing going on with the billionaires, like Jeff Bezos at the NASA conference, where Avril Haines, the director of national security, ended up saying extraterrestrially, weirdly. That same conference was when Bezos gave his speech saying, I want to build enough space stations orbiting the Earth to take 90% of Earth's population and get them into space so that I can turn Earth into a nature reserve. That's what Bezos said at that speech. He said, I'm going to take all the humans off Earth to save Earth. And it's exactly what you just said. Like, it's like, oh, is that a utopia that the Earth is saved? Or is it a dystopia that everybody's doing space mining and Bezos is wandering around on a perfect Earth?
It's PK Dick totally called it the penultimate truth. The entire plot line is everybody living in subterranean colonies under the auspices of war and hostility on the surface of the planet, while the ultra rich get to enjoy like the material paradise of being in the natural world and the natural beauty. And they just kind of keep up this media generation machine to continue telling this story of this false war to keep people underground. You know, these guys, like, I always say this about technology. Like, the guys who build these products, like Bill Gates, these guys don't give their kids technology. They don't give their kids iPads or iPhones. And there's very deliberate reasons for this. Not the least of which because these are highly addictive and consciousness destroying devices and tools. But they understand that the spoils of the natural material world, they see themselves almost as existing under the divine right of kings, where they are the chosen people that get to enjoy this, and everyone else is simply a conduit for capital and for consumption, and are very little more than simply biological wealth generation tools for them to exploit and utilize as desired.
Yeah, there's a Nietzschean aspect as well.
Yes.
They sound like, Nietzsche's Superman, that there's a few elite, really smart people, and everybody else is just basically rubbish, which can be, you see this as well with, who's that guy who died in prison? Many people think he was murdered, but
Jeffrey Epstein?
Yeah, Epstein, with his island where he would sexually abuse and rape, underage girls. That's like the mentality that there's these Nietzschean supermen. They get to this stage in life where they go to this money and they think that entitles them to just eschew morality completely.
Mm-hmm.
Unless
look at Elon Musk. Elon Musk has 10 kids. 10, 12 kids. And these are behaviors. There's something not to drag Leah history onto the show, but I have dated these kinds of tech guys that literally see like the Silicon Valley trophy wife is the woman who has the best, most promising career that you can compel to leave her career and have your kids. I have dated these people. They really do exist. They're not pleasant. And it's this kind of weird, super selfish capital L libertarianism that has infested so much of technology and capital in our current moment. It's really horrifying, right? And everyone's kind of getting a glimpse at it right now with the Twitter meltdown and stuff. But it speaks to this sort of, I agree, it's total sociopathy. It's anti-human. It's violent and on a spectrum of violent behaviors. Things don't always show up as gunshots and house fires. They also show up as the modeling of this behavior and the sort of social cultivation of these traits and championing them. But they're profoundly anti-human people.
Maybe that's the solution to the Fermi paradox. Every planet got its Elon Musk's and
that's Mormonism, man.
Mormonism
has us all inhabiting our own planets in the afterlife.
Right.
Nice.
If you're good.
If you're good. If you're not good, I don't know what happens if you're not good at Mormonism.
You don't get your planet.
Yeah, you don't get your planet. You get trapped in, I don't know, modern American samsara.
Yeah, you end up stuck on Earth. That's
you just get stuck on Earth. That's your punishment. Oh yeah, I have Vancouver guy talking about Eric Davis. Yeah, Eric Davis rules. High weirdness is incredible. Yep, Terrence McKenna, Robert Anton Wilson, Philip K. Dick. This is the best of the best. These are the guys who, particularly PK Dick, when I reflect back on his canon, it feels to me like he is the one who had the most prophetic vision of what modern life would really look like. I highly recommend Dr. Blood Money, The Penultimate Truth, Ubik, all excellent.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, Philip K. Dick's a fantastic one. God, I'm trying to remember the movie that came out that's rotoscoping. It's the animation.
Scanner Darkly.
Oh, thank you. Yes, that is a beautiful representation of modern culture where how did he figure it out? But the understanding of shared consensus reality collapsing. Nobody understands what's happening anymore. There's a constant degradation into total distrust of everything. There's the police state. The people who are victimized by the system end up being the ones who are used to perpetuate the system. The whole thing is really terrifying and speaks to what we are experiencing in the modern day. And I think some good reasons why we should all try to do some psychedelics and figure this shit out.
Yes.
Good idea.
I'm into it. Yes.
Ironically, psychedelics might not they themselves be a conduit for the system to kind of distract people from systemic problems?
So good question. My response to this is that psychedelics are the most fun you never want to have again. They don't have the same abuse potential as like alcohol or television, right? Or this sort of like soma experience that Aldous Huxley talks about in Brave New World. I do think there's definitely an element in sort of modern psychedelic culture of like spiritual bypassing, this sense that, oh, you had a strong mushroom trip and read some Terence McKenna, and now you are a fully evolved being who no longer has to bother with the trials and tribulations of caring for your fellow man. But I think it just becomes is similar to how, like, you know, different parts of, say, evangelical Christianity, or it becomes like a very useful screen for still what remains deeply selfish and troublesome behavior. But Lewis, if you've never taken a stroll down the dark path of psychedelic degeneracy, highly recommend it. I would never recommend doing anything illegal, of course, not on the internet, but but it's worth consideration.
And psychedelics have always been very carefully regulated, because they do have this unusual effect where they instill a prolonged change in psychology after taking them. And that's quantitative. You've been well studied. Like when you take mushrooms, there is an average effect of having an increased appreciation for nature and things like that for an extended period after that. There is alleviation of depression symptoms that are equivalent to many prescription medications. So these psychedelics, I think, even maybe just intuitively, instinctively, authority figures have throughout history recognized the danger that these things pose in a way that maybe alcohol and other lesser substances don't pose as much of a threat culturally. They really do cause this like expansion, this reflection, and they stick with you in a way that I don't think other things do.
You see a lot of these discussions in the Buddhist and meditation circles I run into. There's this underlying theme. I mean, pretty much everyone follows the same Campbellian hero's journey in their tech career. I'm certainly following it myself, where had a hot shit career, super fast trajectory, up, up, up. You get there and then you go, oh shit, this is it. And then you start getting into psychedelics or meditation. Or you quit your job and start homesteading with your trad wife that you met on Twitter or whatever. But the point is, and you hear this, I hear this come up repeatedly in some of my circles about how there's almost this resentment at the loss of talent that happens after people do psychedelics or after they start getting really into meditation, because it cuts down their ambitiousness in like conventional ambitiousness. Rather than being super focused on your equity or your exit or your next promotion, instead you're more focused on, okay, exploring the internal landscape, exploring the formless realms, working the jhanas, connecting with other people in ways that are non-monetizable and non-capitalizable, or you can't capitalize them. And so as a result, there's some pushback, I think, within tech culture against these things. And then obviously there's also just the authoritarian pushback of when people participate in these behaviors, they make them inherently subversive or counter to sort of the prevailing or power structures and institutions.
Is there also maybe a risk in the other direction, though, that you mentioned, Campbell, the post-trip trajectory of these people is to, I don't know, become more kind of about community with other people and stuff like that, because what they experienced, whatever that was. But the ontological status of that experience, just because somebody feels like they're connected to the universe, it doesn't mean that they actually were, right? And we have to think about, like, does that encourage magical thinking? When somebody has a trip, an acid trip, and they assume that because it felt like they were connected to everything that they actually were, it could just be because the amygdala lit up or something, things that we don't yet understand about the brain.
You're making an amazing point, because this is an exact thing that came up when on our Discord, actually, a while ago, a couple months ago, maybe a month or two, we were talking in the group about the published studies around taking psychedelics and the relationship to near-death experiences. And one of the studies I was reading was talking about how people who had never taken DMT before and did not believe in extra dimensions and stuff like that. Not in a scientific way, in like kind of like a, you know, a spiritual way. Once they have taken DMT, it was something like 40% of those people after taking DMT said that they believed fundamentally that they had perceived a real alternative dimension. And so, like you're saying, that is actually very concerning to me because, I mean, personally, I don't think that the drug is creating awareness of something that does exist that you can't perceive otherwise. I think it's being internally generated. That said, I'm not saying that's certainly what's happening. But on the condition that this is a sort of interpretation of something that happened in the brain, I think there could be really real and potentially dangerous implications of people adopting that belief system based purely on the drug trip experience.
Sure.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, that's commonly reported after DMT experiences, is that the reality people encounter is more real than our material reality. And that's a lingering effect for people that are already predisposed or inclined towards intense depersonalization and dissociation. It can create a sustained, persistent effect where they feel totally disconnected from reality. I'm super fascinated by the work being done by DMTX, which is a collaborative research and psychonaut group headed up by Andrew Gallimore and Rick Strassman, who are sort of the two main researchers in the subject of DMT. They're basically training people to be psychonauts in the sense that they're doing preparation for people to experience sustained DMT breakthrough experiences. So instead of the 5 to 7 minute breakthrough that people normally report having through IV, they can have 30-minute, 60-minute, 2 or 3 hour experiences. And the goal of this, I know, the goal of this is to basically create some kind of mapping of this realm and get a sense of what's actually going on here. It reminds me of the work being done by the Qualia Research Institute. They're doing semi-similar stuff, particularly around basically people with very high-level math degrees going in and experiencing DMT because they actually have the language to talk about the non-Euclidean geometry you observe under the experience. Like your average person can't talk about the hypergeometry like from a computational or mathematically informed perspective. But if you have a postdoc in applied math or something do this, they'll have the language after the experience to talk about what the visual elements entailed, which is really fascinating.
That's really interesting. Like, it's not having the language to contextualize, to frame the experience. I could see that being a huge challenge to communicate what actually was, experienced. Like the things that you can produce, like replicably an effect in your brain. It's pretty miraculous in some ways, and I can easily see how in history, without an understanding of brain chemistry and things like that, it would be only understandable as something supernatural to have something like that occur.
For sure. I mean, I think about things like epilepsy and seizures, where historically these were attributed to malicious or sinister creatures or entities or possession, etc. They were conferred with all these sort of unfortunate things. But obviously, as our understanding of medicine and brain behavior has improved and become more sophisticated, we understand now that these are medical events.
Yeah. And it reminds me, like, I've talked a couple times briefly about it, just like throughout my life, I've had many instances of a type of sleep paralysis where I wake up and I'm not frozen, I'm not immobile, but my dream state has not stopped immediately. So for about 5 to 10 seconds after waking up, I can move around, I am conscious, but I see something visually in the room that is not there. And, so I have many memories of seeing like a bat hanging from the window, or like, this one time I saw like what looked like a metallic sphere almost, it was weird. But
don't tell Patrick.
Oh my
why?
God.
What's that? Is that a thing? Oh, the spheres. Yes. But no, yeah. Yeah, that stupid sphere. But I saw the sphere. But anyway, my point being, like, without modern, like, when I was a kid, I I saw this sphere thing floating, and I like
Sure.
I was like, what the hell is that? I ran to the computer. I was like, what the hell, saw thing, da 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 da. And then it's like, oh, this is just like a sleep paralysis thing. Okay, whatever. And I haven't bothered to. I never thought about it again until I got into the UFO stuff, and I was like, holy crap, people are basing their entire public careers on experiences that I've been having continuously since childhood, but I just never think about because I've contextualized them within a scientific framework. And that was fascinating to me. But
it's not UFOs either. I mean, the whole paranormal field is based on this, right?
to varying degrees, I suppose. Right?
Yeah.
Unless there's actually something going on.
Sure. Right. Sure.
You telling
But I
me you
mean,
don't think Bigfoot's out there?
I don't know. I'm not gonna say either way.
God, it's like so crazy. Like Bigfoot's the hardest to believe. I had a friend's brother. He's very, out there. He was telling me that, well, on the most isolated of mountains in North America, there are breeding populations. So, they travel between these isolated mountain breeding regions, and that's how they continue to exist. So there's your answer.
There we go.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
Yeah, mountainous breeding regions. Yeah,
And they bury their dead.
No, they're dead. Instantaneously go to the interdimensional realm. Didn't you know that?
Oh yeah. That's right. I'm gonna read Gordon.
Yeah, it's crazy. But yeah, I mean, honestly, like exactly, like based on my experiences waking up, sometimes I can perfectly believe that someone sees something that isn't there and remembers it as being as real as seeing something that was there. But if I didn't have those experiences, I could as easily imagine that I would have trouble imagining that I could see something that's not there as if it was there.
I mean, you are forced to reckon with the fact that our sensory inputs are extremely high latency analog systems that can be disrupted or affected in profound ways through even the most tiny intervention. I think of how I feel if I don't sleep for a night, how I feel the next day. I mean, shit, look at things like ergot or LSD. I mean, we're talking about dosages here of micrograms that still have profound effects on people's sensory experiences and mental disposition. Like to suppose that our brain and sense system is just this perfect crystalline steady state experience completely unaffected by environment and chemical intervention is totally false, like totally wrong.
Right.
Well, this, and it's also the case, and it was something I was reading about recently in an archaeology article, actually, about medieval Europe, that people were tripping out all the time randomly without intending to because you were constantly being subjected to hallucinogens in nature. So for example, wheat and rye can be infected with a kind of what is a fungus?
Ergot.
Yeah, okay, that's ergot. Okay, thank you. And then you're just getting tripped out. And then like there's other stuff like the different various like internal organs. If they start rotting and then you consume them, they can cause hallucinogenic states. So people will be subjected to random hallucinogenic experiences like semi-frequently without like knowing why it was happening, only having the context of their like faith-based systems to follow it. And it's like, I just imagining that lived experience. Also, when you're just in like such like pain in every part of your body, right? Riddled with parasites, your teeth are rotting, and then you're like tripping the hell out. And it's like, I can only imagine that it would just be like impossible to contextualize as anything other than some kind of like cruel joke from a divine being. It's like, what's happening to me?
Yeah, I mean, man, now I'm really not sold on this living forever pill. But like when, right, like we think of people as inhabiting or like prehistoric experiences almost existing in this demon haunted world where it's just this nasty, brutish, and short experience. I'm sure there were redemptive parts of it, but I'm glad I live with fluoride and antibiotics and birth control and all that fun stuff. But it also speaks to like one of the core Leah axioms at this point in my life is that human beings fucking love getting high. Like, and it doesn't just show up with drugs and chemicals. It shows up like human obsession with expanded consciousness permeates every single facet of both historical and contemporary culture, whether it's sex, drugs, alcohol, television, Twitter. Like, we are obsessed with constantly like stimulating altered and expanded states of consciousness. And it's only, I mean, you know, going back, like, we're half joking, or maybe you were half joking, but like, I think a major reason we've pathologized this human desire maps back to, it makes you a shitty, you're not a productive worker when you can indulge these inclinations. And we can't have anybody detracting from their time on the assembly line, or their time touching their computer or writing JavaScript or whatever. So we've pathologized and criminalized what in many respects is likely one of the most base human impulses that we all possess, which is feeling good and getting high. Yeah, so I have one of our commentators here saying not all human beings love getting high. All right, so just to be absolutely clear, I don't explicitly mean smoking marijuana or taking a drug. I mean seeking out pleasurable experiences in some way that alters consciousness. And this happens like once you start paying attention to how much of just daily lived life is a psychotropic experience. Pay attention to how you feel when you first have your cup of coffee in the morning, or when you first have a bite of fast food, or when you sit down or when you flop onto your sofa at the end of a day. Like, these are all triggering really great brain chemicals. People love this stuff. It's built into us.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like, look up when you're first experiencing like new relationship energy stuff, right? That cocktail of drugs is like actually heroin. Like, we have the receptors because it is this drug cocktail, you know, like you can have hangovers from just purely emotional experiences, you know, and it speaks to that. And I find it funny to think that people would avoid inebriated states, because I find them so fundamentally important for self-regulation, that it's so interesting to me. People, I mean, but everybody's different, right?
Yes, limerence.
Like limerence. Oh yeah, right. Yeah, well, limerence is, yes.
Thank you, Simon. Resident theologian at the Invisible Night School, getting fucked up on God. Nice.
Yeah, no, I've seen that too. Yeah, like in those Megan Church videos, like for sure that's an altered state, right?
Like, I mean, being like, you know, my newfound special interest with Buddhism and meditation, like, meditation feels really good. Like, once you break through that practice and get into that regular state, like working the jhanas, getting into like really deep practice, it is an intensely pleasurable experience. Like, there's a reason people do this. It feels good.
Yeah, there is a fundamental need for humans to disconnect, and there's a variety of ways to do that. But then there's also another side of it, like you can derive sort of this enjoyment or relaxation effect from trying to separate, right? Like watching TV, you sort of disconnect, you stop thinking. And then there's the other side of it where you hyper focus on your thoughts, you hyper connect with yourself. And that can produce sort of like, I don't know, to me, that experience like can produce something similar to the effect of like, you know, stopping thinking, except I also experience a movement forward of like resolution almost in processing.
It just makes me anxious.
Yes, and that's something I've actually spoken to with people about a lot, like the difference in the way people experience, like even cannabis, right? Like I consume cannabis for a fair bit, but a number of people I'm friends with can't touch the stuff because it makes them feel anxious when they smoke. But then it's like I have the same experience of like, oh yeah, you know, I do think about the stressful stuff, but I fixate on it and then I like process it, so I find it helpful for me. But everybody's different. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, V asks a good question. Do any of you get depressed after meditating? So this is, I can actually speak to this a little bit. First of all, definitely recommend checking out Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha by Daniel Ingram, and also The Mind Illuminated by Kuladasa. And I bring this up because both of these books, both of these authors in both of these books have their problems, but they do walk you through basically the maps of meditative progress and experience. And when I say maps, I mean sort of like, okay, when you start, this is what it feels like. You'll have an arising and passing away experience. You'll have a dark night experience. You'll have this sort of like reintegration process. And a lot of them do talk about the experience of dullness or depression with meditation. And I think it's pursuant to that subject, and I'm speaking as someone who does struggle with anxiety and depression, I have deliberately avoided things like Vipassana retreats and sustained insight practices, because these are practices that are very well known for causing anxieties, psychotic breaks, manic episodes, etc., in people that are already disposed towards those events, and also causing the arising of anxiety and depression. If you're looking at a way to get around that, I highly recommend investigating the Dhamma Sukha's Tranquil Wisdom Insight Meditation, which is a metta-based process. They focus on the Brahma Viharas. So metta, karuna, mudita, like compassion, joy, loving kindness. And also looking into the jhanas. Robert Burbea has amazing lectures on them on Dharma Seed, and then also Lee Brasington has written a great book on this. So if you want to do a lot of intense meditation but want to avoid the depression, jhana work and metta-based meditation, I think, are the routes to go. Sorry for my like nerd. This is like when I'm not thinking about UFOs, I'm thinking about meditation lately. So
no, that's great. And so these individuals, I mean, it ties in a little bit to what we were talking about earlier, because what you're describing, it sounds like they're framing the experience in a way that results in a positive outcome. Whereas if it was sort of like free floating, maybe you wouldn't have that sort of directed outcome. Is that, am I understanding right? Yeah, nice.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Cool.
Great. Look, we are coming right up on 2 hours. I don't know about you guys, but I need my beauty sleep.
Right up on bedtime.
Yes, I know. God, I'm so old. Every time these streams come up, I'm like, oh my God, how am I gonna do this? It's 9 o'clock at night. I gotta take a bath and get in bed. But what's everyone got going on?
Nothing. I just moved, so I have nothing on my plate right now.
Cool.
I'm reading this book by Colavito.
Nice.
The Cult of Alien Gods. Cool.
It's about the how Lovecraft's ideas sort of seeped into what became the ancient astronaut myth.
Oh, interesting.
Interesting.
You said that was a Colavito book?
Yep.
Oh, cool.
I think it's from 2005.
I wish we could get Colavito on here. I know he would not say yes.
No, probably not.
He will not talk to me.
Really?
No.
Like, I've told him I'm a big fan. He's just like, I'm a...
You know, this is a little off topic, but back in the day, I used to think Bradley Johansson was a sock of Colavito. I thought it was his alt account.
Dude, poor Bradley is never going to hear the end of this now.
I mean, it was a long time ago. I hadn't spoken to them as much as I have now. I can kind of distinguish them, but yeah, for a minute I did think that.
Well, that's fairly complimentary, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, sure.
Yes. You could be thought to be worse people. We could think he was Moran. All right. Well, on that note, everyone, thank you so much for joining us again at the Invisible Night School. We will see you guys next Wednesday, right? Hopefully.
Yeah.
I'm not doing anything for the holidays, so hopefully we'll have a fun show next week for you. Same bat time, same bat channel, 9 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday evening. So without any further ado, let's say goodnight.
Good night.
Good night, all.
Cheers.